So welcome everyone. Thank you for rolling with us this week as we had a small snafu. We originally had planned to do some content that you guys had had a chance to work through when we all met for the first time in October. So what I wanted to do today is to move forward with what's really the foundation of strategic communications, and that's understanding the audiences you need to reach to make the change that you want to see in the world. So I know many you guys are coming in, many of you very sophisticated in communications or communication strategy. So some of this will feel familiar. You'll hear kind of the take that I have and that Lisa, my co-teacher, has as well, based on the training that we've had. So can you go ahead and advance, Mark? Okay, so hold on, I'm going to minimize all of you. Sorry, not that I really want to minimize you, but I want to be able to see my slides. Okay, so I'm going to start, before we start talking about communications, talking to you about floss. Can you keep going, Mark? You can put the slide up. So what I would say is, many of you know these facts about dental floss and flossing habits, right? You hear it at the dentist every time you come. Your dental hygienist harasses you, or maybe you have magnificent dental hygiene and it's not a problem, but you do hear these things about how important it is to preventing gum disease and all of these other related health risks. But then if you ask your group of friends or family, or maybe if you take a close look at yourself, you'll realize that maybe not all of us floss twice a day, every day. So the point of this is that we can know that something is important. We can even care that we don't want to have something happen, or we do want to have something happen, but it's not necessarily enough to make us act. And this is really the most important part of the work that you all are doing, is actually spurring action among your intended audiences. And so it's not enough just to give them the facts. It's not even enough just to give them stories. It's really honing in on what your audience's values are when it comes to the issue, what their barriers are, and how you can take them the next step so that they actually take a desired action. You can go ahead, Mark. So as you start thinking about communications, what the cardinal rule that I always tell people is to start with your overall strategy, to think about big picture. What is that goal, that long-term goal, the big, hairy, audacious one that you want to see happen? It might be a policy change goal. It might be a behavioral goal, or changes in attitudes or beliefs. It might be securing funding for a particular program or practice. There are all kinds of different big long-term goals that you would have. But what I really encourage folks to do is to sit down and articulate that to yourself, and then to take a step back and understand, if that's where I need to be in 5 years, what is the first incremental step I need to take to get there? So I'll give you an example. For a long time, I worked at the Pew Charitable Trust, which is a foundation originally based in Philadelphia, now largely based in Washington. And we had a 10-year, $60 million campaign to advance high-quality pre-K. Universal high-quality pre-kindergarten at the state level, to get states to pay for it. So that was our goal. We wanted every state to have it. We wanted every state to make it available to people from all backgrounds and incomes and walks of life. And yet we knew, depending on the state, that not everyone was going to be ready for that. So each state had to take its own path. And in Texas, for example, the first bite that we could take was going to be providing high quality pre-K to the children of military families. So once we had that win, we could move on to children who were in the foster care system. And as you start softening the ground and building buy-in, and people are seeing this is successful and it's having good outcomes, you can get to the point where you're moving toward a universal program. So, when we started that campaign, pre-K was kind of a soft, circle time and finger painting idea. It was not something that people really thought of as part of the K-12 education continuum. And, through a variety of different activities to soften that ground up, we've gotten to the point where it is really kind of thought as a matter of course when it comes to education. So this will come up a lot for you as you develop your strategic initiatives. You'll only have a year in your third year to actually be implementing your strategic initiative. But as you think about the big picture of where you want to end up, breaking off that chunk for the first year and understanding what is this step I need to take to get there is really critical. You can go ahead and advance, Mark. Mark? Hello? Thank you.
Sorry.
That's quite all right. So you've probably heard of SMART objectives. This is the way to break off that manageable chunk for the first year. They are things that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. And that's really where I'm talking about that 12 to 18 months. So rather than saying I want to build policymaker support for effective reentry systems and supports for people, for returning citizens, you're not really, what does support mean? You could go and you could have a meeting with a policymaker and they say, yes, I totally support this. And you could go back another year later and say, so what have you done? And they said, I've been so supportive. I've been supporting you all year. But they haven't necessarily taken an action. So articulating to yourself, what is the really specific thing? It could be a dollar amount. It could be a certain number of legislative champions who work with you to draft legislation. It could be a certain number of different stakeholder groups coming together to really work on something at the community level. But you really want to think about what is that realistic chunk. Now, the addition to this that I have added since working with the culture of health leaders is understanding how much the equity, diversity, and inclusion aspect of your work really requires adaptability and flexibility. So it's not going to be as concrete as I just need to raise $100,000 from these two funders. Often because you're working to change people's attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs, you need to have that adaptability. You need to really build in an understanding that you may have to pivot. You may need to respond to circumstances on the ground, whether they're external things that are happening in your community, whether they're internal things that are happening with your colleagues or your organization. Your work is hard, and that's why it's so critical. So, I encourage you as you're thinking about what a specific objective would be for yourself to really give yourself that wiggle room. So you can go ahead, Mark. So the reason I encourage everyone to start with strategy, to start with that big picture goal and then those specific objectives, is to really understand who you're trying to reach. And this is where we're going to dive deeper into the question of how you prioritize your audiences and how you reach them where they're at, and then move them where you want them to go. So often you will have a decision maker. It could be a decision maker group, it could be an individual, it could be a select number of individuals, but these are the people who have the power to say yes or no to making your objective happen. So I should have started with a small caveat up front. I have a number of examples from various different social justice or other campaigns that are sprinkled throughout this presentation. Do not take them as gospel. If there's something that doesn't work for you, that is totally fine. They are here just to serve as illustrations or as thought pieces for all of you. I'm not promising that they are without problems, every one of them, but I work hard to find good examples, and then they work for some people and they don't work for others. So small caveat on this. So you'll see this was an ad council campaign on the left that was prioritizing, or I'm trying to scrub the word target from my language because it's too gun oriented, but that was trying to reach potential foster parents. So they understand, all right, this is the decision maker we need to reach because we want to encourage more people to bring in foster kids to their homes or potential adoptive kids. And if they knew they had to reach them, there also is a barrier they're trying to get them past. So, for folks who are considering adoption or considering foster care, the barrier here in this ad is, what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm not, what if I don't feel like I'm a great model of parenting, and so I'm able to do this? And it really was telling them it's okay. No parent is perfect. It's okay to be imperfect. You can still be somebody who is really important in the life of a young person, right? That's where you see the potential adoptive parents as that first decision maker. But, for all of you, you work in enormous diversity of locations, geographies, situations, issues, et cetera. It really could be any particular group that you need to take an action. So that's where these other bullets are, is potential, or these other points, dot points. So I've also have to get rid of the word bullet. Okay, so go ahead, Mark. So here's kind of another big picture point for all of you. And Mark, you can put up the rest of the text on this slide. For a lot of folks, the idea of communications just means sharing information. It means, and it sometimes it conjures up in people's heads really tactical stuff like, I need to have a digital media strategy, or I need to, get lots of stories in the newspaper. That's what my funder wants. And what I really encourage you to do is to think broadly about communications as something that is inextricable from your overall strategy. And this really applies as you're developing your strategic initiative, because the types of changes that you are trying to make in the world are ones that really require building relationships and connecting to other people. And you cannot do that without understanding the fundamentals of effective communications, and really from a strategy standpoint, not a tactical one. So it really means understanding that decision maker, how ready they are to hear your message, what they care about, and what holds them back from taking action. Okay, keep going, Mark. Excellent. Now, I also want to talk about strategic communications in light of equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's a different task when you are trying to change or influence people's fundamental attitudes about other people, about the way the world works. It is, I won't lie, it is much harder. Often you are trying to reframe an issue in someone's head, and you really need to figure out how you reach their head and their heart to make that change happen. So I often think of a continuum when it comes to EDI-informed strategic communications. And that's moving people from a place, particularly when your work involves a population or a community that's faced oppression or racism, intolerance, hatred, any of those things, that you really need to move people along this continuum. So, if the first block is, I pity that person. Oh, those poor people with disabilities, or, oh, that's just so sad, that this country has a history of slavery, but there's not much I can do about it. It wasn't me, it wasn't my family, so can't everybody get over it? That was a long time ago. So that is a place where someone acknowledges that there are conditions of privilege and oppression, but it's not enough. And it is important to move them further to the point where they actually care. It's not just that they know, they care that this is a problem. And that's sort of your place of sympathy. The next one in line that I see is empathy. And that's where you really feel a stake, a personal stake, in changing the conditions of privilege or feeling and hearing the conditions of privilege and oppression. It has something to do with you, but you may not necessarily understand what you're supposed to do. And the final place, that I have seen so much success among other cohorts, and I expect to see from all of you, is moving the audiences you most need to reach to a place of activist compassion, a place where they feel a sense of ownership in executing change, in making change happen, not just seeing that there are conditions of privilege or conditions of oppression out there, but that it is really, the onus is on all of us, no matter who we are, to try and make the world a different place. Okay, I'll keep going. Mark, can you advance? Okay, so, and I should pause for just a moment, that we will have time at the end for questions and further discussion. And then I really encourage all of you, if you don't have my email, I'll make sure that we send it out to you after this, that if you want some personalized support around any of this, I would be delighted to hear from you. So prioritizing your audiences, we talked about your decision maker, the person or people who have the power to say yes or no. Now, in some cases, you or your colleagues or your organization may not be the best ones to carry a message to change that decision maker's minds. So as you are moving down that ladder from your goal to your objective to your decision maker, there's another category of messengers. You might be one of those messengers, or you might need to think about who is it that has the strongest pull that I can equip to help inform or educate or spur action with my decision maker. And often it's both is the thing. You know, you're not going to be invisible in this process, but you are going to want to recruit allies, whether they're unusual suspects or whether they're, you know, part of your choir to help amplify your message. So, you know, to go back to the pre-K example, one of the things that we found incredibly successful with conservative policymakers is that there were a whole bunch of big corporate CEOs who were encouraging investments and state investments in high quality pre-K because it had to do with workforce preparedness and high school completion. And it was this really economic argument. There was a Nobel Prize winning economist named James Heckman at the University of Chicago who really talked about how, you know, high quality pre-K is not circle time and finger painting alone, that those things that are actually equipping people with the soft skills they need to function in society. So, you know, that was a case where we were able to bring in other important and influential stakeholders who could help carry the message. All right, will you advance, Mark? Great. So, I will, so, you know, now we're thinking about, okay, so what does my audience care about? And I will spoil it for you that it may not be the same thing that you care about. So really the onus is on you to figure out how you can find common ground, how you can tap into a shared value, and how you can help them get around the barrier that they hold. So this here is a campaign that was created to encourage support and embracing of the LGBTQ community among Asian and Pacific Islanders here in the United States. And so it really was, you know, tapping into that value of family. You know, we all, you know, we care about family. Family is important, but then if that's my starting place to help overcome the barrier of potential intolerance or lack of understanding for people who are LGBTQ. You can go ahead, Mark. Okay, can we, I'm going to give you a little quiz for yourself to think about who the audience is here and what the value the ad speaks to and what the barrier is that it helps get the audience get past.
Thank you, dear.
Oh. Is it buffering?
Very supple. It's like I was at your age. Back then, I was a sex expert. Used to call me the buttered biscuit. I know about birth control, too. So you can ask me anything, baby.
Bedsider.org has birth control information and a lot more. And it's...
Have you had sex in this car yet?
So I know at least one person who's on this webinar who has to be familiar with the Bedsider. This is a guide for birth control options that was created by the National Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy. And they are fantastic at coming up with these really funny ways to reach their intended audience. I don't know, do I have a chat box? Do we have a chat box here? Yes, no? Maybe? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Let me see if I can figure out how to see it. All right, so pop quiz. What's the value that you see here? And I don't know why I can't see the chat box, but I'm gonna try and figure it out. Anyone wanna jump in and say what the value is? Oh, there it is. Danielle is laughing, right? Yes, the value is families. What else? Anyone else? Sex, the value is sex. People like it and they want to have it, but they don't necessarily want to talk about it because it can feel uncomfortable or embarrassing. So what the Bedsider is trying to do is say, hey, you know, it's okay, you have questions, we've got answers. You don't have to have awkward conversations if that's your barrier. You can go to us in the privacy of your own home in front of your computer and you can find out more. So, this is just an example of how they were trying to reach this. The ad was actually created in conjunction with BET. And, it was a way to reach African-American Black folks, specifically around this question of birth control. There were a bunch of different varieties of it. Okay, can I have my screen back? Nope. And we can go to the next slide. And Danielle, if you like that one, I have about 1 billion from them. They're so awesome. Let's see, where is the screen? Is it up, Mark?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't see it.
Should be able to see it.
Oh, wait. Switch to shared content. Here I am. Okay. So another little quiz one. This one is quite arresting. There are different tasks that you will undertake in the work that you're doing. And in some cases I talk about this in terms of the stages of readiness that your audience will be at. In some cases, you're going to be doing work to educate audiences who really don't know about the issue. They don't know something's a problem, and your job is strictly to educate them. That's the first way you're going to soften them up. So this was a campaign for Moms Demand Action, and I think you can, hopefully you can read the text, but you have 2 kids. They had a few different ones of these. One of them is holding an assault rifle. The other is holding a Kinder Egg, which is a chocolate that you eat, and then inside is a little toy with tiny little parts. And so it's banned in the United States because it's a choking hazard. And the idea here is you are educating your audience that one of these kids is holding something that's been banned in America to protect them. Guess which one? So we don't sell Kinder Eggs in the interest of child safety. Why not assault weapons? Okay, you can keep going, Mark. Now, in other cases, you're going to be doing something that's more like translating. That's getting your audience to see another point of view. And there's some different techniques for that. It sometimes will involve making the invisible visible, or the abstract concrete. And this often, I think, is really effective where you use the element of surprise with your audience. In this ad, you see a stairwell that has a picture of Mount Everest, but it's really driving home this point about building more facilities for people with mobility issues. This uses handicap, which I don't like, but I think it illustrates this point of, this is something that you would use every day. You don't really think about it any other way than taking it as it is, and you need to reframe or translate what it actually could mean for a different population. Okay, can we keep going? All right, I have another movie for you.
Today, women make 80 cents for every dollar a man makes. What does that end up costing women?
That's a tough one. No idea. Per month, per week,
I love this campaign. Oh, I love that it does that same job of really translating. It takes an abstract concept like wage inequality and makes it super crystal clear. Oh, that's what it costs to women to have the gender pay gap. So, again, it's a really good example of this translation task. And, many of you, I think, have to do some translational work to either make the needs of a specific population visible or understandable or relatable to a population that has either, walled themselves off or doesn't really see this issue as relevant to them. So it's a really critical task. It takes some work to think through what are the ways that I can kind of turn this on its head and present it to someone in a way they can grasp it. So there's another task, which is motivating to action. This is where you have an audience that, they know and they care about something, they believe it's an issue or they understand it's an issue, but they don't really, they're not taking an action. So your job is to motivate them, to show them the benefits outweigh the risk, you understand where they're starting from, and to be careful about avoiding judgment or condescension or presumptions. So this is a quick video. I love movies. I feel like at school I always want a movie time, so that's why I used to see lots of movies. Okay, go ahead, Mark.
So I'm just going to leave you with, I guess, two quotes. So one is Jerry Garcia, the singer who is the lead singer for the Grateful Dead, and he said, somebody has to do something. It's just incredibly pathetic that has to be us. And I think that's true, that in some ways it has to be us. As Hippocrates said, walking is man's best medicine. And so I'm going to finish by asking you a question. And this may have some personal challenges for you. So, you might be very busy with work or kids or both, and you may be in pain or have other priorities. But my question to you is, can you limit your sitting and sleeping to just 23 and a half hours a day? So something to think about. Thank you very much.
Right. So, again, another funny video snippet that really is about, kind of turning something on its head, but also motivating people to action. If we know that we need to have 30 minutes of physical activity a day, it seems pretty minimal when you think about 23 and a half hours of the rest of the day to do whatever you want. Okay, carry on, Mark.
So I'm just going to leave you.
Ooh. Okay. So this is a big concept because I see this all the time. And this is one that you'll hear from me and Lisa constantly. And that is the idea of not repeating the barrier. So in your audience's mind, there is some barrier, whether it's knowledge or belief or motivation or understanding, that is holding them back from taking the desired action. So, if you picture Richard Nixon holding out his hands and saying, "I am not a crook," right? The first thing you think is, "Ooh, that guy's a crook." Right? So what we see I see all the time are myth versus fact sheets, and they always look like this. So you see on the left side, you have the myth, which is simple, it's bold, it's in red, SNAP creates a dependency. And then you have the fact side, which is receiving benefits from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, formerly food stamps, hardly enables anyone to live well. There's like a ton of text, it's gonna take me longer to read, and I've already just seen first what the myth is. It's repeating the barrier. So what I always encourage folks to do is don't do that. Don't give up half of the real estate of your communications to repeating for someone what they may already misunderstand or believe. Mark? So this is a message box. Communications people have all different, they sometimes have a message square or a message triangle, or, there are a bunch of different ways to think about messaging. With a message box, this is something that I create when I'm trying to reach a specific audience about a specific issue. And it has 4 points. They're not a script. You don't have to repeat them in exactly this order, but it's really helping people. It's starting where you tap into a value that someone has. You help them find a way to get around the barrier that they have so that you can make an ask, and then you articulate the vision, which matches your value, of something that, this is why doing that thing is going to be good for all of us. Mark, is there? Yes, there you go. So with your value, you're making your audience nod back at you in agreement, right? So all children deserve a great start in life. Barrier. What you say when your audience says, yeah, but, that's really expensive to do, paid childcare. I don't think we can do that. Then you make your ask. which is the one specific thing you want them to do. We want you to, do a yes vote on the Child Care Act. And then the vision, when all kids are cared for, they get a great start and their parents are able to, work and be productive and, help them get a great start in life. Something like that. That's the so what. This is what the world will look like when your audience does what you want them to do. Now I'll say you guys have a worksheet that goes along with this process, and you can practice with this. You can share the things that you're practicing. It does take practice, especially to keep these short and succinct. So, you're not writing a tome in each of these. So many of you know last year, the state of Florida passed a law to return the franchise, to return the right to vote to returning citizens. Florida has, I think it was 1.4 million people who are returning to society. They have paid their debt and they have a right to, just like all the rest of us, to have a say in who governs their state and what the policies are. So this is some of the messaging that we saw there. Floridians believe in second chances. Oh yeah, we can all get behind that. No matter how I feel about something, yes, I believe it. But right now, 1.4 million are permanently denied the right to vote because of a prior felony, despite having paid their debt. Vote yes, because these are our family members, friends, and neighbors, and they've earned the opportunity to give back to their communities. So you can see how, by starting with that value that everybody shares, you can start moving them around this circle or this message box to get them to a place where they see the value of taking an action. Okay, we can keep going. So I want to talk a little bit about asks, because you'll be doing a lot of this as you create your strategic initiative and you try and reach these intended audiences, messengers, decision makers, etc. Making an ask is the beginning or building of a relationship. And so there are lots of ways to start breaking this down to make the most effective ask you can. And that's to, identify your audience's entry point. That's that stage of readiness that we talked about. Do they need to be educated because they don't know? Do they need to be motivated because they don't care? Do you need to translate it because they don't understand their role or why it's important? And then you want to make an ask that stays just inside their comfort zone, but is a little edgy. And then you can keep moving them up at the ladder of engagement. So, I use this in a separate course on policymaker education. Where, in an initial meeting, you might sit down and, share face-to-face with a policymaker, here's the report that we did that shows you why issue X is of concern to your constituents. Can I leave this report with you? And can I follow up with you later if we have more information available? And so then maybe the next time you have a report or you have a one-page or a fact sheet, you start sending it to their staff. And then from there, if you got more interest, you maybe invite them to a meeting, to send a staffer to a meeting or even to come themselves. And you just keep moving up. There are lots of different varieties of what that ladder looks like. But it's kind of softening the ground and using those asks to build a relationship. It shouldn't be the end just by getting them to take a specific action. Okay, we can keep going. Okay, so some pitfalls as you're developing messaging. Talking only about abstract issues versus talking about people. So, if we're talking about income inequality or economic security issues, if we just talk about X number, is unable to pay the bills, etc., and it's just kind of abstract numbers and facts, you are likely going to lose at least some of your audience because it just doesn't resonate. They can't picture it. We can keep going. Numbers without scale. I see this all the time. So somebody wants to talk about how many, how many places there are in the state of California to buy guns. And you say, there are X, tens of thousands, you have a specific number about that. What we really encourage people to do is translate it into social math. So you have here, if women's representation in Congress was the Golden Gate Bridge, we'd have about this much bridge. So, it's a way to kind of see we've only got 18% and we need to do something. This is from a campaign called She Should Run. So with the gun example that we did, we took the number of guns and we said there are more places to buy guns in California than there are McDonald's. And that really kind of shakes people up because they think, wow, I passed 3 McDonald's on my way here. So, it takes something abstract and it makes it concrete. Okay, we can keep going. Facts without feelings, right? So here we have hate crime statistics. It's a nice bar chart. I'm not saying you can't have bar charts, but I don't really feel what this actually means to the populations that are listed out here. I don't really see it's hard for me to connect with how that actually plays out for those individuals or groups. So I really encourage you, as you are developing messaging, to try and combine those two things. It's not an either or thing all the time, but to make sure you have a little of something both. Okay, you can keep going. Okay, so this is my last video, my last movie for all of you, which I personally love, and I think really drives home this question of making something feel real and visualizable and kind of changing and turning something on its head. Oh, buffering, it shouldn't. It's embedded. Here we
And I can't change, even if I tried, even if I wanted to. And I can't change, even if I tried, even if I wanted to. My love, my love, my love, she keeps me warm. She keeps me warm. She keeps me warm. She keeps me warm. And I can't change, even if I tried, even if I wanted to.
So I want to leave you with one last advice. Thank you, Mark. And maybe I'll turn my video on so you can actually see me and my really dirty office. And that is that I want you also to be thinking throughout this about the power of stories and the way that you can incorporate stories into your work as illustrations of messages. It's not always what you say, it's what you show. And you probably remember this from, your early writing classes as a kid, that, the value of showing and not telling. The power of the work that all of you do is so significant and important in terms of reaching people and changing and improving the lives of people who need it, who deserve it. And being able to share those stories, share your own story, and what draws you to your work is, I think, really incredibly powerful. And I think the most powerful thing about telling a story that is not heard enough or not given enough attention is that it makes it possible for other stories to be told. So I don't actually have the picture up, but about a year ago, you probably all remember the hearings for Brett Kavanaugh as the nominated Supreme Court Justice, and the fallout related to that from about sexual assault, especially, that had happened a long time ago and what it can mean when those stories come out. So I wrote an op-ed that got published in the Washington Post about my own sexual assault. And the thought process I went through, because it happened when I was younger, of, for the first time, looking and Googling, like we all do, to find out more about what had become of this person, and finding his wife, actually, and really wrestling with the idea of what it means to tell that story and the fact that something like sexual assault does not just involve two people, but has a web of relationships and implications. And what I found in the process of telling that story, which I had not anticipated, is that I had huge numbers of people, including people who I didn't know very well, coming up to me and saying, "Me too," which of course was the point of the movement. And so what I would say is every time you share stories from the communities you work with, from your own experience, you make it possible for more of those stories to become visible and to become told and shared. And ultimately, as we try to shift attitudes and beliefs and behaviors, it is recognizing our common humanity and seeing it that actually really, I think, has the greatest power to make that happen, far more than words. So, alone at least. So that's kind of my parting thought for you. I would love to hear questions, comments in the remaining 10 minutes, and then of course to hear from any of you individually if you have some more thoughts that you want to share. Thanks, everyone. Okay, I'm going to open the chat box in case there was something here. I think Barry had to go. Worksheets on the platform. Any questions, thoughts, comments?
Hi, Beth. It's Huda. I have a question.
Yeah.
The box that you showed earlier,
Yeah.
of with the ask and the vision, etc.
Mhm.
I'm surprised that vision came last. How much do you think people need to be part of the visioning initially? And how much do you think that I'm kind of surprised that it came last instead of first.
So that completely makes sense. And what I would say is that's just how I organize the box. I encourage people to do it in any particular order. It's not a script. So you might start with the vision and move to that shared value and then help them get around a barrier. You really can start in any place. It just depends on how you want to tell that story.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Others?
Yeah, this is Len.
Hi,
When
Len.
hi there. When you were talking about the ladder, you talked about identifying people had different points of entry, and then you listed those points, and I didn't get them quickly. So
Sure. So you'll see, and I know this presentation will be up. I think we'll make the actual copy of the presentation available too. Thumbs up from Mark. That's thinking about those stages of readiness, that each audience may be in a different place to hear what you have to say. And so, as you're thinking about what the ask is, you really need to think, is this someone who's totally bought in and they just need an extra nudge to take an action? Is it someone who really has never heard of this or hasn't thought about it, and so I need to educate them? So it's, kind of sharing knowledge, building will, these different stages of readiness that your audience will be at. So you'll see those throughout the presentation.
Okay, thank you. If there's, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's not another question. So we in my initiative to this morning at staff meeting, we were having this precise conversation about audience, and the work we're doing is kind of helping people understand the health impacts of racism. So, and it turns out we started doing it by bringing in kind of the facts, right? Bringing speakers in to talk about this stuff. And 18 months in it, our evaluation data tells us that our audience is largely middle-aged, middle-class white women. And so the discussion around the table is, how is that the right audience? I mean, we're in a county where 85% of the population is white. Black folks in this community don't have the levers of power, which speaks to one of your, and so we're struggling with that. Like, do we go with this? Is this a population that we just leverage this, or I don't know.
No, I think that's a great question. And what I would encourage you to think about again is, okay, these are the people that you're reaching, but to make the change that you want in your community, who do you need to reach? Are they one audience? You may have multiple audiences. And so, what is the message that's most effective for them? Is it a fact-based one, or is it a story-based one, or is it both? Is there another population that you need to reach to activate to be more vocal? So of the Black and brown population within your community, do you need to do some education or some will building or motivation so that they speak up and share their experiences to the extent that they're comfortable doing it? So, again, I always encourage people to really start with, okay, what's the difference I want to make? And then, who are the different groups who need to change what they're doing so that we can make that difference happen?
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else?
So I was sort of in the same bag as Huda.
Mm-hmm.
I'm writing right now. I'm playing. You mentioned early childhood in the beginning of the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing the same thing here in Jackson, Mississippi. We have
Mm-hmm.
some to look at universal pre-K,
Mm-hmm.
but there are a lot of factors in there
Mm-hmm.
In terms of how to get the collaboration going.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that model that you put up there with the barrier, the ask.
Mm-hmm.
But I had some concerns about the order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I'm glad to hear that, that can be adjusted.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, there was the last thing I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry. I said I think it's a great model to use. Like I said, like writing this plan to sort of introduce it to the team
Mm-hmm.
and incorporate this. And I'm glad that you said that it could be adjusted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the early childhood education and care is a great kind of illustration of how powerful it is to have different messengers. And I just know this because I've spent a lot of my life on it. So when we did the pre-K campaign at Pew, we also wanted to make the point that seniors who are paying taxes but don't have kids, they also have a stake in it. And so we worked with a group that was sort of tangential to AARP called Generations United. And so it's kind of thinking about, all right, who's going to influence the decision makers, and how can I equip those folks to be my ambassadors or my third party validators, to use a jargon term. And what's the message that they can carry that will help change that attitude?
Yeah, so the problem down here is that you have a lot of agencies making a killing on the problem.
Mm-hmm.
You're not really sure if they want it resolved.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting a great deal of funding from
Mm-hmm.
the issue itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, so you see pockets of success, but
Mm-hmm.
you won't see it like on a larger scale, because that would really, you have a lot of agencies whose whole livelihood are based around the
Mm-hmm.
issue. Yeah.
Well,
So,
I'd love to talk to you at some point if you need, a sounding board. One of my favorite topics.
thank you.
Anyone else? I think we are almost right at time. But, again, if something bubbles up for you, or you wanted to ask something just one-on-one, my email is here in this chat, and then I know Mark is going to post it as well, along with the presentation and the video, and the worksheet and so on. The only thing, Mark, do you mind making sure that it doesn't say elevator pitch? Because I think it still says that on the website.
Yeah, that'll be changed. Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for rolling with us. I realize it was not quite according to plan, but hopefully you were able to get something out of it anyway.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a good. I'll post everything on the platform.
Bye-bye.
And all right, talk soon.
Take care.